I'm Jon Delano, KDKA-TV political editor. Thanks for joining us for Inside Pennsylvania Politics. We're now just weeks away from Election Day, and there's sure a lot to talk about. I'm joined by our panel. They are young, politically active Pennsylvanians from diverse backgrounds and opinions. I'm the only old guy here, which makes sense because elections are really about the future. Joining us on our left side of our panel, Lauren Williams, Southside Democrat and president of the Young Democrats of Allegheny County, and Mike Smarr, Findlay Township Democrat, father of two, and chair of the Findlay Township Democratic Committee. And joining us on the right side of our panel, Isabella Russo, Oakmont Republican and member of the Allegheny County Council of Republican Women, and Joshua Minsky, South Oakland Republican and president of the College Republicans at the University of Pittsburgh. This week we're talking mail-in ballots, the increasing nasty language, the impact of third parties, and the gender gap, particularly among young people. We've seen both candidates going after 18 to 24-year-olds. Alex Cooper's Call Her Daddy is the top podcast among young women. And she made headlines this month with an interview with Vice President Kamala Harris about abortion and reproductive rights. In August, former President Trump spoke with comedian Theo Vaughn on his YouTube channel, which has 3 million subscribers, many of them young men. News broke this week that Kamala Harris's team is in talks for an interview with Joe Rogan, who hosts a podcast that's extremely popular among young men. It's clear Harris is making a concerted effort to reach young men, but we are not seeing Trump appearing on blogs or podcasts that appeal to young women. So what's the significance of that? Are men more convincible, or does the Trump campaign think it can win without women? So it's going to focus on driving up turnout among men. Well, let's turn to our panelists to think about this and talk a little bit about this. There's both a sort of a gender gap, and maybe there's an age gap as well. Lauren, let's start with you. Do you think that Vice President Harris needs to do more to reach men, young men in particular?
I don't know that I think she needs to do more. I think I appreciate her effort to try to reach young men instead of making this election solely about reproductive health and focusing on women, kind of creating a broader coalition of people to fully gain support. If she's elected president, she's going to be the president of men and women and non-binary folks, right? So reaching out to all of these people and wanting to include them all in the conversation is important.
But does she have a male problem, Mike?
Well, I'm voting for Kamala. No, but I think that yeah, I mean, there's some issues because a lot of her rhetoric is geared towards reproductive rights. That being said, I think that she does make a compelling argument when it comes to democracy and her thoughts on the economy and things like that to try to compel men to vote for her.
Yeah. What about former President Trump, Isabella? Do you think he needs to do more to reach out to women?
I think he certainly can. I know, obviously, I am voting for President Trump due to a lot of, his last 4 years of his presidency was just incredible when it came to, immigration and inflation, all that. But I think at the same time, I think he needs to take a step back and try to reach out to suburban women especially too, because I think they're a little bit, they're kind of between, do I afford groceries or my rights are my rights? So they're a little bit torn right there.
Josh, let me ask you in terms of the age difference. You're the youngest on our panel today. Yeah. Do you think that the former president has locked it up with young men, or is there more that he can do with young men as opposed to men in general?
Well, I certainly think that in terms of young men and men in general, it's, yeah, absolutely. He's definitely trending towards, like the male vote is definitely trending towards Trump and the female vote is trending towards Kamala. And that definitely, there's definitely that divide in the country. But President Trump has done very well with men because, well, the values that are pushed by the Trump campaign and values pushed by the Republican Party tend to appeal to a lot of man and male voters. But he certainly does have to do work with the female vote. They can't neglect that. Obviously, it's half the country. So, but you'll find a minority of women voting for Trump, minority of men voting for Kamala. But it's going to come down to a few thousand people.
Seems like there's almost some unanimity among at least your focus on young folks, that the candidates can do can do more. You've touched on abortion rights, and we know that abortion rights are the top issue for young women who say they link reproductive freedom to economic freedom. Does it all come down to that? Is this really a question of where you stand on the abortion issue? What do you think, Isabella?
I think with abortion, personally, I could never get an abortion. I think that's just up to, the mother that's expecting. But I think at the end of the day, people are really concerned with being able to buy groceries and get gas.
So you think the economic issues are more important than the reproductive rights issues?
I think people are going to be voting more based off of the economic issues, yes.
Do you agree or disagree?
I disagree. I think you're right in the sense that reproductive health and reproductive justice is directly linked to economic health. When we think about if you can't afford to buy groceries for yourself as a single person, you can't afford to buy grocery for yourself and a child. And so taking away a woman's choice whether or not to choose to have a kid is not going to help the economic situation in that household. And when we talk about reproductive health, we're talking more than just about abortion. We're talking about birth control, but also the ability to have a child via IVF. And having these conversations and having Donald Trump and the GOP talk about it as if it's not important or as if it's just about whether or not a woman has a right to choose not to have a child is diminishing to women and what they want to do with their body.
So, gentlemen, with respect to the gender gap, does this issue play a role? Do men care about the abortion issue one way or the other? What do you think, Mike?
I certainly do. I have a young daughter, and I look at her future, and I think to myself, will this impact her future? And does she have the right to health care when she comes of age and right now? So yeah, absolutely. And for me, it does. For other men, I mean, everybody has a mom, everybody has sisters, everybody has, women in their lives that they look up to. So,
Josh, do you think the abortion issue is a compelling issue for young men, particularly those that you know at Pitt?
Yeah, I mean, abortion is a compelling issue for everyone for obviously different reasons. But I'm a fully pro-life person. I'm very proud about that. But in terms of the federal, when we're talking about the presidential election here, we're obviously referring to a candidate who actually is pretty pro-choice himself and votes for abortion laws to be legal in the state of Florida where he actually lives, and he's come out in support of that. And furthermore, he's obviously a big proponent of putting abortion back to the states. And so when it comes to talking about this issue, I think for a lot of men and for President Trump, when he's saying, oh, I don't want to talk about this, it's not important, it doesn't mean that it's not important to him. It just means that that's not something that he's going to be focusing on in the federal level. And he's correct about this. Abortion is so divisive, and so divisive issues generally should not be crammed down on half the country because you set the precedent where Republicans can come in and do the opposite. And so we want to avoid that.
Yeah, Mike?
I have a question. So whenever we're talking about Trump giving rights to the states, the abortion rights to the state,
yeah.
Why doesn't he just go even further and give it to the individual?
Well,
that's part of the argument is should the individual have abortion rights or do the states get to decide whether the individual has abortion rights?
I'm happy to answer that. Well, by allowing the individual to directly vote on the issue of abortion, that is what bringing it back to the states means, right? You have to, in order for these institutions to exist, whether it's Planned Parenthood or something else, you have to allocate funding for those things, and those institutions receive taxpayer dollars. So obviously that requires legislation, that requires people to vote on it, et cetera. I mean, unless you're saying someone can just go wander into the hills and get an abortion in the middle of the forest, obviously you need institutions to deliver those abortions, and those institutions require state funding.
Yeah.
And federal funding.
Well, and that's where the disagreement lies. I mean, you could just do it through the states, and as a general rule, that's probably allowing people to have a voice directly on this issue is less divisive for the country.
Let me ask a little bit about the gender gap, because we do see the significant gap between men and women and how they're voting in this presidential election. There's a Gallup survey of 18 to 29-year-olds that show that both genders really are more likely to identify as liberal among 18 to 29-year-olds, more likely to identify as liberal than they were, say, 20 years ago. Young women have made the bigger move on issues including the environment, abortion, gun laws, and racial equality. 40% of young women now identify as liberal compared to just 25% of young men. We posted that chart, and you could see that men basically have stayed about the same, while women tend to have become more liberal. And I guess the question is really, are issues driving it? Is it more than just abortion? What do you think, Lauren?
Is it more than just abortion that's driving young women to be
more liberal?
More liberal? I think so. I mean, you mentioned it, the environment, the economy, when we think about racial justice, when we think about LGBTQ plus rights, I think women are more compassionate, and I think women care more about other people. And when we look at the two campaigns that are running, we're talking about someone who is trying to help the middle class, someone who's trying to help everyday Joe, and then we have someone who's trying to help billionaires, right? And I think one of them definitely is going to appeal more to women. And I think when Donald Trump was president, women got the short end of that stick, and I think we're just trying not to go back.
Well, let me ask you, Josh, because as a young man, young men seem to be, if not becoming more conservative, and there's some other polls that suggest young men are becoming more conservative, but they're at least not getting more liberal. What's going on here?
Well, the reality is that the Democrat Party, the men that they have trotted out at the top rungs of leadership in the Democrat Party, unfortunately, don't represent what a man should look like and how they should act. And Lauren has talked about how women are more compassionate and how women have certain features that distinguish them from men. That's 100% true. It's also true that men have a desire to protect, to provide, and do things like that, and not just be fully subservient. And there's no problem with equality in a relationship, but the issue is that men have looked at the candidates, like people like Tim Walz, people like Doug Emhoff, and they don't see a traditional man there. And whether or not we can laugh and pretend we don't, it's not true, but the fact is men have been trending more conservative, and so the polls speak for themselves.
Yeah. This is a fascinating conversation. I'd love to spend more time on the emasculation of males. Is it true or not true? What's going on politically? But we're going to have to wrap our discussion on this right now. We'll come back to this, I hope. Coming up, mail-in ballots. We're tracking the numbers in Pennsylvania and seeing which party's voters are getting out the vote early. Stick with us. Welcome back. I'm Jon Delano. Mail-in ballots started going out a few weeks ago, and we're getting a look at just how many Pennsylvanians have already cast their votes. As of Tuesday, October 15th, 1,700,000 mail-in ballots have been requested in Pennsylvania, 60% by registered Democrats, 29% by registered Republicans, 12% by others. About 536,000 mail-in ballots have been returned statewide. Now, party registration is not an exact prediction of which candidate the voters choose, and we may see some ticket splitting. But early voting can be a measure of enthusiasm among voters. So far, the Democrats lead in terms of how much of their requested ballots have been returned, with 35%. Republicans have returned 27% of their requested ballots, and independents have returned 23%. Now, in 2020, over 2.6 million Pennsylvanians voted by mail during COVID. So let's turn to our panel now. This is a very different election than 2020. We're not in the middle of a pandemic without a vaccine. Campaigns typically see mail-in ballots as banked votes and spend a lot of resources chasing voters who've requested ballots but haven't returned them yet. There's a several percentage point increase in Republican requests compared to 2020. So panelists, which party would you rather be right now when it comes to mail-in ballots in Pennsylvania? What do you think, Isabella?
I mean, obviously, the Democratic Party likes to vote by mail. But I think the GOP has done a great job of encouraging their voters to vote by mail. I know personally, I requested my mail-in ballot this year. First time I'm voting by mail.
Have you sent in the ballot yet?
Not yet, but I'm going to.
Okay, yeah, that's why the figures are what they are.
Yes, definitely.
Good. What do you think about mail-in ballots, Lauren?
So personally, I always vote in person. I just like the feeling of going into a voting booth and kind of circling the box. But I think that voting by mail is important. And I think the Democratic Party has done a lot of work to ensure and encourage people to vote by mail. And I think, even locally, our county executive has done a really good job of securing our mail-in ballot process and making sure that it is a very secure process, especially because over the years, the GOP has really had this rhetoric that voting by mail was fraud and not secure. And so I think we've done a really good job of making sure that wasn't true and encouraging people to vote by mail.
Josh, what do you think, Josh? As you know, President Trump, former President Trump, has been very skeptical of mail-in ballots, but the Republican Party in this state is trying to encourage more people to vote by mail. How do you come down on this issue?
Yeah, I mean, I think that a big reason that President Trump lost in 2020 was because he discouraged mail-in ballots, and he lost probably tens of thousands of voters. I actually don't have a particularly large problem with mail-in ballots as an idea, but there certainly were a lot of questions about the 2020 election as to voter integrity. And so, of course, Democrats are going to overwhelmingly be using mail-in ballots, and Republicans will feel want to more vote in person. But Lauren is completely correct. I think that the institutions have been a lot more shored up this year in terms of mail-in ballots. I think that there's a lot more security, so I definitely encourage mail-in ballots. Yeah. But like her, I'll be voting in person too.
You'll be voting in person. Yeah. Mike, let me just remind everybody that we've had 1.7 million ballots requested, mail-in ballots requested this year. In 2020, 2.6 million actually voted by mail. There's going to be no way that the number of mail-in ballots equal what happened in 2020. Does that hurt the Democrats?
I'm not sure it does. I do think that we're not dealing with a pandemic anymore, and that's going to make people that might have been afraid to go to the polls more inclined to.
Right.
I'm going to the polls. I've never voted by mail, and I always vote in person. And I voted every election since I was 18 years old.
Great discussion. Thank you. Coming up, tougher language on the campaign trail. Both candidates are getting personal. Will their warnings send voters to the polls or turn them off entirely? Stick with us. Welcome back. I'm Jon Delano with our panel of young political activists. We're hearing tougher language in the final weeks. For example, Vice President Harris called former President Trump, quote, increasingly unstable and unhinged at her rally in Erie on Monday, while Trump has repeatedly called Harris, quote, stupid and mentally disabled, as he did in Philadelphia this week. Last month at a rally, he added that, quote, Kamala was born that way, unquote. Well, what kind of impact is this language going to have on voters? Panelists, let's start with you, Mike. What do you think?
This is what we've been hearing since 2016. It's not any surprise. I don't know. I'm just numb to it.
Does it have an impact on voters?
No, I think everybody's numb to it.
Everyone's numb to it. Josh, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I wish people would stop attacking each other. I mean, it's just, it feels like a South Park episode is what we live in nowadays, unfortunately. People just constantly attack each other, but what do I think of it? I think it's ridiculous that they're doing.
So why are they doing it, Isabella? What does Trump see in this? What does Harris see in this?
I mean, look, Trump has a past of saying things about other politicians. I'm voting for him because of his policies that he did in office those 4 years, but sometimes his character is a little bit questionable. I think with Kamala Harris, she's playing his game now too, and she thinks that that's going to gain support on her side of things as well. But all in all, I just think they both should honestly have more respect for each other because they are running for the highest power of the United States.
Yeah, interesting. But if it works for Trump, maybe it works for Harris. What do you think, Lauren?
I think I disagree that people are numb to negative talk between candidates. I think it's something that people are very much in tune to and are watching. And I think for a lot of Republicans, the reason why they're choosing not to vote for Donald Trump again is because of his negative words that he said against other candidates. And I hope to see Kamala Harris not follow through this track of continuing to say very negative things about Donald Trump in regards to his character in person. I think if you want to talk about his actions or lack thereof, that's fair game, but I think him as a person is something that is untouchable, and I think vice versa to him as well.
Yeah. Well, I think this language stuff is not going to get any less. I think in the last weeks of the campaign, we're going to hear tougher and tougher language from both of them. And I guess the question is whether it impacts voters or not. We're going to take a quick pause right now for another quick break, but we're going to be back with some final thoughts. Stick with us. Welcome back. So really quick, let's talk third parties on the presidential ballot in Pennsylvania. In addition to Harris and Trump, voters have two other choices. Chase Oliver is the presidential nominee for the Libertarian Party. Jill Stein is the nominee for the Green Party. In recent polls of Pennsylvania voters, Stein has achieved between 1% and 2%, while Oliver is between 0 and 1%. Are these candidates going to be spoilers, and for whom? Mike, what do you think?
I think in 2016, as we were talking a little off the air, Jill Stein is a spoiler, can be spoiler to Kamala Harris. I don't think she will this time. I do think that the margin is going to be larger than the number of votes she gets, but it's absolutely possible.
What do you think, Josh?
Yeah, I mean, he's fully correct. I think that the margin is like within 0.5 to a point within margin of error for the polls we're seeing right now, and if she's polling at 1.52%, absolutely, it could make the difference.
You think it could make a difference?
Yeah,
Yeah.
100%.
What do you think, Isabella?
I think federally, not a chance, but in our state, I think it definitely could. We're known to be a purple state. I think it's going to be so close between Harris and Trump. So just some of those votes could easily make or break one of them.
Does that mean the Libertarian could hurt Trump? What do you think?
I'm not sure that he can, and I'm also not convinced that Jill Stein can hurt Kamala Harris. I think in terms of third-party candidates are not the best that we could have, and so I think we're kind of still locked in between the Trump versus Harris.
So the Democrats don't think these third-party candidates are going to hurt Kamala Harris. You think there's a possibility they will hurt Kamala Harris? Got it. Good. All right. Well, another great panel discussion today. Thank you so much for being with us. We appreciate it. And thanks for watching Inside PA Politics. You can catch us every week through the election at 11 a.m. on Thursdays, streaming on CBS News Pittsburgh and on KDKA Plus at 12:30 on Sunday afternoons, both streaming and broadcast. Thanks again to our panelists, and thanks again to you for watching. Remember, our government is only as good as you make it. Be sure to vote. Have a great day, everyone.